What is the scariest example of medical negligence you've seen? I was 22 years old and pregnant with my first child. I didn't show at all because of the position he was in my body. He hid completely in my back. He ended up being born posterior. On June 24, 2014 I woke up at around 7 a.m. to my first contractions. They hurt and I knew my son would be born on that day. He was a week early and I was excited and scared. My roommate called the ambulance for me since we had no car and lived a few hours away from the hospital. My OB was alerted and she agreed I should head in. My fiancé and roommate got a friend to drive them to the hospital a bit after I had been taken away in the ambulance. My man completely freaked out. This was his first child as well. All he saw was me in tears from contractions. The nurse when I arrived never put the lap belt on me to monitor contractions and tried to say I wasn't in labor. I was having contractions every 5 minutes. I couldn't walk, I just cried. The nurse tried to discharge me and my fiancé lost it. I literally could not walk, I was in such agony. I had never experienced any pain like that in my life. The nurse told me, "Shut up, your crying is scaring other patients." Dave, my fiancé, ended up getting security called but also my OB. My doc came and checked me out and for the first time, I saw this nice older lady turn to darkness and use a slew of curse words at this nurse. I didn't think she even knew most of those words. My doctor admitted me, but before they got me upstairs to a room this nurse came in and gave me a shot of morphine without recording it in my chart. Then they sent me upstairs, put me in a room and left me. After I got to the new room my water broke in a pool of blood. No one came in for a half an hour. When they did they said it was normal and asked me if I wanted an epidural. I begged for one. After 20 minutes the lady who was supposed to give it came in. She missed my spine twice and I told them to stop, I have to push. They stopped and let me roll to my back. The nurse checks me again and said, "Oh, you're fully dilated, you can start pushing." And walked out of the room. I had this horrible feeling something was wrong. I just thought I have to get him out right now. I grabbed the sides of the bed and pushed as hard as I could. I could feel him crowning. I stopped, pulled in a big breath and pushed as hard as I could. His head popped out. My man grabbed his head and screamed for the doctors. The doctor barreled in. Didn't even have scrubs on yet and said, "Oh God." Another contraction hit me. I pushed again and my baby was out of me and gone. They rushed him away. I'm in tears. Where's my son? No one had checked me, and when my water broke 45 minutes prior my placenta had detached and his cord wrapped around his neck. He was purple, no crying. A few minutes later my baby boy was brought back to me screaming but still a pinkish purple. I held him tightly and cried. I thank God he was safe in my arms. Another 45 minutes passed and I was so tired I was nodding off with him in my arms. My OB shook me awake and asked me if I felt alright. I just remember being so cold and tired but so happy my son was in my arms. She asked me to try to wake up a bit. She needed to examine me. She moved my blankets and immediately told me to wake up. She told have to make sure I stayed awake. I had a second-degree tear and had been bleeding out for almost an hour. She gave me a local she had already prepared and proceeded to stitch me up. She got halfway done and the bleeding hadn't stopped. She looked further and I had torn my vaginal wall getting him out. She told me I have to get the bleeding stopped and I don't have any more locals ready. Can you handle stitches without it? I nodded. I ended up with 12 stitches and about half of my blood in a pool on the floor dropping from the hospital bed, covered up with blankets by the nurse. Now after all of this, they accused me of being an addict. My son and I were apparently experiencing withdrawal symptoms, so they ran our blood. It came back positive for substances. They told me social worker would be called in. I cried. I held my son in utter terror and just cried. My fiancé, being more in his right mind, said, "No, this is BS. That nurse gave you a shot of morphine before they fired her when we were trying to get you admitted." He went to the nurse in charge and asked to have them check my file. She said there was nothing about the shot in there. He pushed further and demanded they check the billing and the meds the nurse checked out. Sure enough, the nurse had checked the morphine syringe out and billed my insurance for it, but yet she never put in my chart she administered it. Then hospital security had to come in and tapes had to be watched and a whole case unfolded. CPS never came to speak to me. My son ended up being a beautiful little boy who is now 5 years old. I'm still terrified every child I deliver.